Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our curator conversation this morning. I believe that we have everyone admitted that was in the waiting room, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Elizabeth Darling, and I'm the manager of membership and annual giving here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And welcome to our most recent edition of our member-only virtual program, Curator Conversations. And this is a perennial favorite here. We've got our year-end review, a collections acquisitions roundtable of new items that we've added to the collection in 2025. A bit of housekeeping before I hand it over. If you are having any technical issues throughout the program, please let us know in the chat. We'll do our best to assist you. And we will have a bit of time at the end of the program for any questions. So feel free to add those to the Q&A or to the chat throughout the program, and we'll get to as many of those at the end as possible. And also a very quick thank you to all of you for your support as members. Of course, we couldn't do any of this without your support, so thank you. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Andy Talkov, who is our Senior Director of Curatorial Affairs.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and welcome back. So as Elizabeth said, I'm the Senior Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And so part of my responsibilities are to help all of the folks that you're going to talk to today build our collections, among other things. And I think most of you are aware that, for almost 200 years now, since 1831, the VMHC has been building a collection that represents the story of our Commonwealth. And today, that collection numbers more than 3.5 million items, and includes books, many of which are incredibly rare, diaries, letters, scrapbooks, maps, and sheet music that are all part of our library and manuscripts collection. It also includes photographs and ephemeral items like menus and programs for performances and posters and stamps, and postcards, textiles, military items, ceramics, decorative arts, paintings, furniture. We've even got a couple of pretty good sized vehicles in as part of the museum collection. And although over the years the museum has purchased items, the vast majority of items in our collection have been donated by individuals. And so in the museum collection alone last year, we added what we would call 44 groups of objects that included everything from political ephemera from the 2025 election cycle, to a 1930s employee ID badge from Newport News Shipbuilding, a Lego model of the Klein car that's part of our collection. But the number 44 groups is a little bit deceiving, because one of those groups of objects which was a collection of Civil War era currency and other materials, numbered more than 1,000 items. So we add a lot to the collection every year. And today, as Elizabeth said, I'm joined by a number of my colleagues who will introduce themselves as we go through the program, to talk about some of the interesting collection additions in 2025. And so since we're at the starting line of the program, I'm going to kick us off with an item related to the history of automobiles and auto racing. So I think that many of you have probably heard that maybe the origins of early auto racing and hot rodding of cars might have been, it's a story often related to Southwest Virginia and the history of bootlegging during Prohibition, where bootleggers would modify their cars to make them go faster than the cars of the revenue agents that were, trying to shut them down. But in reality, the hobby of hot rodding was actually born in the late 1930s on the West Coast, where racing enthusiasts would race on the dry lake beds northeast of Los Angeles. And the origin of the term hot rod is a little unclear by historians, but many say that it might have something to do with the replacing of the camshaft of the vehicle with like a quote unquote hotter version known as a hot stick or a hot rod that might increase air and fuel flow to get higher performance of the engine. Um, Now, during the early days of hot rodding, like cheap and relatively simple vehicles tended to be the most commonly used. So, like Model T Fords, Model A Fords, and Model B Roadsters tended to be the favorites of hot rodders. And they were modified to decrease weight, improve wheel traction. They would lower the car body over the frame. They would tune up the engines. They would pull off hoods and bumpers and anything that would add weight to the car so that they could get the most speed out of it. Some historians say that the hobby of hot rodding may have had a boost after World War II as the economy was booming, so cars became more available to more people. Um, some say that many World War II veterans returned with technical skills that might have made them more inclined and able to hot rod engines and adjust cars. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that like during the 1940s, there were lots of small military airports that were dotting across the United States. And after World War II in the 1950s, a lot of those were abandoned and they made for great spaces for hot rodding and racing cars. So the National Hot Rod Association, which was formed in the 1950s, had Virginia members, but it was really small local clubs that gave motorheads like a strong sense of identity and opportunities to meet with other car buffs. And so the 1950s were really the golden age of hot rod clubs across the country and here in Virginia. They had incredibly creative and alliterative names like the Gas Gobblers, who were formed in Roanoke in 1950, the Virginia Wheelers, also from Roanoke in 1953, the Ridge Runners from Abingdon, formed in 1955. And in the Richmond area, there were groups like the Dixie Gents, the Dixie Knights, the Road Sparks, the Virginia Creepers, the Coachmen. Um, and one group, which you can see here, are the Richmond Road Saints, which were organized by Edgar Alonzo Jett III, who's referred to as Chuck. So we'll refer to him as Chuck as we move forward through this program, and several of his friends, including Scott Broadus. And so Chuck passed away in 2023, and Scott approached us about adding his Road Saints jacket. So among the things that these hot rod clubs would produce to show their club affiliations were things like patches and decals and license plate holders and jackets like this beautiful example that Chuck must have really adored and took such good care of. I mean, this jacket is 70 years old now almost, and it is in almost pristine condition. And so you can see they add their own custom patch for the Richmond Road Saints. And we're really excited to be able to add this piece of Virginia racing history, particularly the sort of mid 20th century phenomena of hot rodding, to the Virginia Museum of the Virginia Museum of History and Culture collection. Now, one of the really nice things about Chuck is that racing was a little bit of a family affair. So here you can see a couple of images of Chuck with his dad, Edgar Alonzo Jett II. And this is a great photo on the left of Edgar and Chuck on the hood of a 1950s Corvette, looking over the plans of a proposed drag strip that they were working on. Um, Chuck's dad was a Richmond native who was a lieutenant colonel in an armored division during World War II. And after the war, he worked for the Army Research Center in Chicago, but he came back to Virginia and operated a company called Ready Quick Foods, which was in Colonial Heights. And they made ready sliced French fries in large quantities. And Chuck's dad said, who was like 50 years old when this photo was taken, said that, he, in 1957, that like he had tinkered around with Model T Fords in his youth, but his interest really began when his son like let him take a little motorbike that he had, a Cushman scooter, for a spin. And so in 1957, when these newspaper stories in the Richmond Times-Dispatch appeared, they were working on the creation of a drag strip in Colonial Heights at a defunct airport that was sort of it looks like it was at the junction of like 95 and where like Temple Avenue might cut off. And there was a mile long runway basically that they would use for drag racing. It was 165 feet wide, and it was known locally as the Eastern Dragway, and the first supervised race was in 1958, and like 700 people showed up for the pre-opening trial runs that March, and the strip continued to be used into the early 1960s. Many of the car clubs died out in the 1960s when Ford and Chrysler and General Motors began making muscle cars for the young male market. And so car racers and builders of the 1950s were not only maybe shifting their interests, but they were also getting older and they were starting to raise families and were working. Um, as for Chuck, he attended VMI, graduated from the University of Richmond, worked with Ready Quick Food Company, and ultimately retired from Richmond Cold Storage. But racing and working with cars was really a major part of his life. His presidency of the Richmond Road Saints in the early 1950s was something that he was really proud of. And in fact, the Road Saints, according to Scott Broadus, the donor of the jacket, continue to function as a social club for surviving members, and they gather occasionally. But we're told that they don't no longer race. So we're really thrilled to be able to share not only Chuck's story and his dad's story, but also the story of these hot rodding clubs. It's really quite a unique piece in the collection. And if you want to sort of learn more, there are some great online resources about racing in Virginia. So the Virginia Sports Club, which was formed in the 1950s, Chuck and his dad were very engaged in that, have a great website with a very extensive archive of their newsletters and photos that I would highly recommend. The Blue Ridge Institute and Museum of Ferrum College created a website called Full Throttle Racing and Rodding in Southwest Virginia, which is fantastic and has great photos and information about hot rodding in Virginia. There's a site called the Drag Strip List, which has for all of the states a list of drag strips that were created. So there's some information, some great photos of Virginia drag strips in that site. And then if you're really interested, there's a pretty lengthy video of drag racing in Petersburg in 1958. You can find that on YouTube at the Wired Customs page, and it's narrated by two of the people who were involved in that in racing, Tim Clary and Fletcher Harrison, and their narration is amazing. And they are able to identify not only all of the cars, but remember a lot of the people who showed up at these races. So we're really grateful to Scott and, of course, by extension, to the Jet family for being able to share this with us. And now I'm going to pass the baton on to my colleague, Noah Tinsley.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Noah Tinsley. I'm an assistant curator here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. Been here about 2 years. And today I'm going to be talking about a sort of unusual petition that was made by a free black man in Washington County in 1862. And yeah, without explanation, it can be sort of misleading. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the petition is basically it's Henry Wilson petitioning the local circuit court in Washington County to enslave himself to the widow of his former master rather than having to go to Liberia or one of the free states. And so at first it seems, very strange, like, why would someone ever want to, re-enslave themselves after they've gained their freedom? And, it shouldn't be mistaken. This was not an option that was pursued by very many people. But if we sort of explore some of the kind of paradoxical laws around free blacks in Virginia, especially before the Civil War, you can kind of understand why a petition like this to voluntarily enslave oneself can actually, make some practical sense. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so basically, after the Revolution, there were a series of kind of small scale manumission laws. So there was this new outlet or way for formerly enslaved people to gain their freedom. And so this meant that there was this kind of slowly growing, free black population. And they were sort of, that was a concern to a lot of the, people in power. They were concerned that free blacks, kind of had their minds tainted and could influence other enslaved people to maybe incite, rebellions or riots or something like that. So there was this anxiety, where people were trying to enact some of the ideals of the revolution, and through manumission, but then they were also sort of concerned about this population. And these concerns kind of come out in an 1806 law that simultaneously bans importation of slaves. So, trying to keep, like, we have this population here, let's not make it any bigger because that's going to cause even more problems. So that was the first thing, was to ban importation. That's not really true. Like, there was still a lot of kind of circulation that happened, obviously, in the 19th century, but that was the attempt. The other part of the law was that if you do gain your freedom, you have 12 months to leave the state or potentially face expulsion. And so this law was not actually enforced all that frequently. It was mostly a way of sort of pressuring free black people to live within the line. And so even though it wasn't enforced, it always could be enforced. So there was, it kind of brought this controlling kind of paranoia. And this case also shows how there's a real difference between, reality as it actually is and how it goes according to the law. Because what turned out to be most important was these free blacks, relationship to their communities and to other white people. And so they might be, living for 10, 15, 20 years in a particular community, but through the relationships that they formed with other people in that community, they have a good reputation. And, when it comes to going to court, which was often a hyper local affair, they sort of did well, and people, weren't really that upset. But there was this law that technically, if you're a free black person, you have to either leave or kind of re-enslave. Well, it was really like you could go to Liberia, which was a colony, in West Africa, to ship people off to, but that cost the state a lot of money. You could also, the state could come in and expel people by force, sort of corral them up. That would also, there was concerns that was kind of an overreach of state power. Similar to how the Civil War was this sectional conflict between like states' rights and federal rights. There was also kind of a smaller scale version of that where people were fighting for like county court rights versus state court rights. And so, they felt that could be an overreach. And so then as, sectional conflicts kind of increase in the lead up to the Civil War, like, in the 1850s, there is more anxiety. Like this 1806 law had been kind of enforced, not very much, and it was sort of lax, but it kind of came back up again. And it seems like this, very regressive law, that with like voluntary enslavement, it just sounds kind of preposterous, but it actually comes from a petition of two free Black brothers, and they basically, they had been asking for permission to stay within the county so that they could stay around their people and not have to leave, but they had been indicted, under that law. And so they sent a series of petitions, and then finally one of them said, what if we, enslaved ourselves so that we're not even free and Black anymore? Like, then could we stay? And so that sort of, floats through the courts and goes dormant for a while. And, between 1852, when it's originally submitted, and 1856, when it's passed as this generalized law. But then by this time, you have this new way for free Black people to kind of protect themselves, because, it seems like freedom is just the goal in itself, but if freedom means that you can't be with your family, or you have to leave the life that you knew, is that really freedom? And so there was this, some of the more like extremist people were starting to crack down more, starting to indict people more in the lead up to the Civil War. Things like John Brown's raid also increased anxieties around this. And so it was sort of this perfect solution where, you didn't have to pay for, all the expenses to transport people to Liberia or deal with the government overreaches of expulsion. You could actually reinforce it through their own will. And of course, this was used by a lot of, pro-slavery propagandists to say like, oh, this is Black people's natural condition is one of slavery, and, they don't know what to do with freedom if they have it. And so, the fact that they're petitioning kind of shows how just this institution is. But that's not really the case here. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, so this is sort of summing it up and returning to Henry Wilson's situation. So he was freed in the will of John Wilson, who again was the late husband of Elizabeth Wilson. I couldn't find exactly when he died, but it must have been sometime in the 1850s, and he was sort of hanging out in Washington County, and he was working as a farmer. But then he eventually gets indicted along with 7 other men in the county, and so he has this decision, and that's sort of what you see in the text of the petition. Like he chose not to go to one of the free states or go to Liberia, but to stay around, because he had at a nearby plantation to where he was, his wife was also enslaved, and he also had 5 young children. And so, in this case, like his freedom meant leaving this sort of young and growing family. And so yeah, this was not a very common practice. There was only a few hundred cases of this, different, petitions of this. But the fact that it exists at all kind of shows the contradictory legal framework that free Black people had to navigate. And it sort of prompts us to ask what freedom really is. Like if you have to leave everything you know and everything you built, are you really free? Next slide. And to learn more about different stories of free Black Virginians and this kind of ambiguous status that they held in a slave society that, was trying to uphold this strict color line where Black equals enslaved and white equals free, and any mixture felt like a threat. And we have an entire exhibit on that was curated by Elizabeth Klaczynski, and she was very helpful in helping me research this as well. And it's a remarkable exhibit. You can learn more stories about this and kind of put this unusual petition into a broader perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Elizabeth, who is up next. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Noah. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We, of course, appreciate your support as members and really appreciate you joining this program. So we talked about hot rods a little earlier, car racing, and now we're going to talk about boat racing. We have here in Richmond and in the Richmond area, the Virginia Boat Club. I'll talk a little bit more about the history of that and go to the next slide, please. So, excuse me. The Virginia Boat Club, if you are familiar, here's a little clip of rowing, was actually founded here in 1876 as the Olympic Boat Club. It was a 7 members of actually the Olympic baseball team decided they wanted to get in a boat and paddle around. So they formed, again, the Olympic Boat Club in 1888. That boat club merged with another boat club here in the area and formed what is now called the Virginia Boat Club. They built a beautiful, opulent boathouse on Mayo Island by 1930. And honestly, from what I've understood about it, it was more of a social club rather than an athletic enterprise. They were known for sort of their raucous card games and socializing, and occasionally, I guess, got in a boat and paddled around the James River. In 1972, Hurricane Agnes actually destroyed that boathouse, and sort of the club went dormant for quite a while. People just, I guess, weren't interested in the sport, and they sort of weren't interested anymore in sort of that aristocratic milieu of a form of socializing. But in 1986, five people came together and decided they wanted to revive the club. There are now 2 boathouse locations here in the Richmond area. One is at Rockets Landing. It is actually underneath that restaurant called the Boathouse. So if you're ever dining there, you can sometimes see people launching off of the docks and rowing. So it's kind of fun. The other boathouse is located in Romeus Landing State Park, where actually that clip was filmed during a practice. Both 2 really beautiful locations. And today the club is more focused on community building. There's fantastic learn to row programs for adults. So if you ever are interested in learning how to row, you can do that in the spring of every year. There's a really robust master's rowing program, which is just a term people use for people who've had a few years of rowing experience. And there's also a great program involving James River High School, so junior rowing as well. We have in our collection a lot of images. You can see sort of on the bottom left-hand screen, that's an image from the 1920s. So we have a pretty decent amount of images again, and sort of ephemera from sort of that 19-teens, 1920s, 1930s era. But we were really lucky this year to gain a little bit more of a few more contemporary items. So if you go to the next slide, please. So these are just a few examples of a huge collection that came in related to the Virginia Boat Club history, sort of mostly focused from the 1990s all the way up till this year. The collection was donated by a club member, Lisa Crutchfield Barth, who has been involved with the boat club again since the late 90s. So you can see there's a winter training program, sort of sheet. There's sign-in sheets of people who go out onto the water on the bottom right-hand corner. And then there's what's called a bow number. That's 752 from the head of the Occoquan, which is a race the Virginia Boat Club participates in pretty much every year up in Northern Virginia. So also, if you are a subscriber to Virginia Living, you might have seen this summer edition. The Virginia Boat Club was actually also featured in one of the editions of the magazine. So it's an exciting sport that a lot of people don't necessarily know a lot about. It's called an Olympic sport, so it's sort of distinct from more mainstream sports in America, like basketball, baseball, football, all of those things. But it's a really dynamic sport. It's a wonderful club, and we are just delighted to gain a little bit more of a stronger collection associated with, again, more contemporary items. So with that, I will turn it over to another one of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, my name is Paige Newman. I'm the manager of library cataloging and curator of library collections. And just wanted to, again, thank you all for your support. We couldn't do what we do without you all. So I'm going to talk about the Mulberry family. The Mulberry family was an urban commune founded in 1972 who lived in a couple of houses located at 2701 and 2703 West Gray Street at the corner of Mulberry Street. The commune included openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, and straight members during a time when most Richmonders were still closeted. The Mulberry commune was a family of members who were allowed to be open about themselves to others with whom they lived. In 1978, the Mulberry family incorporated as Mulberry Group with these purposes. These are the values they chose to use in defining themselves: to share resources, talents, and skills, to balance the need for group stability with the importance of encouraging spontaneity and differences, to balance personal wants and needs with those of other individuals and of the group, to live in an ecologically oriented household that includes a vegetarian kitchen, conservation of natural resources, and cooperative education regarding nutrition and physical fitness, to maintain a long-term commitment to this group and dreams of group enterprises, such as a residential learning center, small business, and that would probably include an urban and country residence. To form a structured approach to equal accomplishment of physical maintenance and property improvement, and to live in a group built around human growth concepts, to integrate power as it relates to group decisions, and to be aware of the personal relevancy of a lifestyle seeking to make intentional community an acceptable and viable alternative within our larger society. So next slide, Andy. Thank you. So the next few slides are going to be some of the materials that Mulberry family donated this year. There's a letter that is to Stephen Letton, who was a founding member of the Mulberry family. And this letter concerns approval of the loan for the purchase of the first Mulberry house at 2701 West Gray Street. The second item is a grocery list from 1985, and it kind of is a little insight of what went on in Mulberry Street. And it's from January 2nd, 1985. The few items needed were bread, lemon juice, napkins, sponges, eggs, and milk. And by the cereal, grape nuts is written in pencil. So next slide. So other donated materials include bylaws, statement of incorporation and purposes, photographs, VHS tapes, which include their annual meetings, cassette tapes, there's postcards, there's correspondence from members, and they were called Mulberries. These journals that are in the middle, they go from 1972-ish, I believe, up into the 1990s. And these include meeting minutes with notes. And in addition to these are financial materials and statements. Next slide. There's also a full run of the Mulberry preserves. It starts with volume 1 in 1980. It goes up to volume 26 in 2005. This is the Mulberry Family Newsletter, which includes annual meeting notes, membership information, and updates of members, again, like they were called mulberries. Next slide. So here's another photo from 1976. And so the Mulberry House was one of the best examples during this time of gay and straight socially mingling together in harmony. Family members continued to reside at the house through the 1970s and 1980s, eventually selling one property in 1986 and the other in 1987, marking the end of a 15-year span where members intentionally cultivated space of their chosen family for mutual benefit and support during a divisive, conservative, social, and political climate regarding sexuality within the larger city of Richmond. So I'm going to hand this off to my colleague, Corey.
Thanks very much, Paige. My name is Corey Piper. I am the Museum Collections Curator here at the VMHC. And today I'm sharing two new acquisitions, which are pastel and charcoal drawings by the modernist architect Richard Neutra, which the museum was able to purchase thanks to a gift from Robert and Lynn Glasser. We can go to the first slide, Andy. Neutra was one of the most renowned and world-famous architects, really, of the 20th century, though he's not one that might immediately be associated in many people's minds with Virginia. He was best known for sleek, glass-walled buildings, which are mainly found in California. But Neutra was also a frequent traveler and a steady sketcher. Wherever he went, whether he was traveling to major cities or small towns, he would carry paper and pastels and record the buildings and landscapes that he encountered there. And so these two drawings that he'd made in Virginia that we were able to acquire, on the left, Fall in Stanton, Virginia, and on the left, Charlottesville, Virginia. They're fairly modest in scale. They're only about 9 by 11 inches in their dimensions. On the left, the Fall in Stanton, it shows the brick commercial center of downtown Stanton, which some of you might recognize, the cupola of the Augusta County Courthouse as the focal point there in the center. On the right, Charlottesville captures an iconic view from University of Virginia's lawn, where you can see Jefferson's Rotunda and the surrounding pavilions that appear on the horizon. So while their subjects might be recognizable, the forms are really divided into angular planes and bold areas of color, which give each of these drawings the scenes a modernist kind of geometry. Next slide. Neutra's presence in Virginia might seem unexpected at first. He was born in 1892 in Vienna, Austria, to a prominent Jewish family, and he studied architecture in Europe before immigrating to the United States in the 1920s. He settled in California, and he became one of the major voices of 20th century design, known for his open interiors, light-filled rooms, and an emphasis on linking architecture with the natural environment. On the right side of your screen, you see the Kaufman House in Palm Springs, which is perhaps considered one of his great masterpieces. And it really embodies the sleek, modern style for which he was best known. This style of architecture, it's an enduring style that's really undergone a revival quite recently in the craze for all things mid-century modern, and has ensured a lasting reputation for Neutra in the records of architectural history. But his Virginia drawings, to return to those, were made in 1960 when the director of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, Leslie Cheek, had organized a statewide exhibition and lecture tour for Neutra. And as he traveled throughout the state, he sketched the familiar streets and college greens and public buildings that he encountered throughout Western and Central Virginia. The drawings that he made in Virginia weren't exhibited during his lifetime. Instead, they remained a kind of personal archive of visual notes. He used sketching as a research tool, a way to understand the different regions and how they expressed their identity through architecture. Next slide, please. But 2 years later, in 1962, Neutra returned to Virginia for a major commission, a private house that he built for Reynolds Metals CEO Walter Rice and his wife Inger, which you see on the left here. That's the Rice House, which overlooks the James River in Richmond and is one of the most significant examples of the international style of architecture that can be found on the East Coast. It features floating roof planes, glass walls, and polished aluminum panels, all of which really reflect new ideas about technology, materials, and landscape. This house didn't appear in isolation. It was built during a period when modern architecture was really reshaping Richmond, and it was constructed alongside major projects like Gordon Bunshaft's Reynolds Metals headquarters, which was built in 1958, an image of which you see on the right, as well as other buildings like the highly experimental aluminum-clad Markel building nearby, the Reynolds headquarters, which was built in 1965. So Neutra's drawings from 1960, they really represent an early moment in that sort of shift to a modernist sentiment in architecture, but also show how this major architect was studying Virginia's older architectural forms before creating these striking new ones. Next slide, please. And so while these pastels, they depict classically inspired buildings like Jeffersonian domes or brick storefronts, Neutra interprets them through the lens of modernism. The lines are broken, the contours are simplified, and the colors appear in concentrated bursts. These works stand in contrast to traditional paintings and prints of these sites that circulated widely and in the early and mid 20th century, images which we have in great depth in the collection here at the VMHC. But these drawings in particular reveal how a leading modern architect viewed Virginia's older landscapes and translated them into forms consistent with contemporary design language. At the same time, they also speak to Neutra's broader story, a Jewish immigrant who became a central figure in shaping American architecture. His travels and lectures and commissions helped spread these modernist ideas throughout the United States and to Virginia. And works like these, both on paper and in built form, become part of the state's varied architectural history. And so we're very pleased to welcome these drawings into the collection and look forward to being able to share them in future exhibitions and rotations, where I think they'll offer a fresh perspective on two well-known Virginia landscapes, but also provide a fascinating window into a moment when the Commonwealth's architectural identity was beginning to change. So with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Julie.
Thanks, Corey. My name's Julie Kemper, and I'm the exhibits curator here at the VMHC. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about a recent donation, the Lang Semler collection. Next slide, please. As with many donations that we have people call and say, oh, I have this. This started out with the donor, Thomas Rogers, contacting and say, I have these two images. They're in really bad shape. We've had them scanned and digitally basically restored. And I'd like to donate these two broken images and digital copies of the restoration. Well, you know, we do think about condition a lot when we're taking items into our collection. And there is concern that, you know, we wouldn't really prolong the life of these two items anymore in a museum as might happen somewhere else because of their condition. So I have to be honest with you, I wasn't real excited about this. But in talking, he said, well, and I have other things too that relate to this family who arrived as German immigrants just one generation before. And so I said, great, tell me what else you have. Next slide, please. This is the result of I have more. A fairly substantial collection of images, documents, letters, newspaper articles that talk about this family. Next slide, please. So this is really the story of Hulda Elizabeth von Lang and her family. Shown here is Henry Semler. It's actually her second husband.
Hilda was born in Landsberg, Germany, about 1845, and she immigrated to the United States in 1864 as a teenager, and by 1866, just a couple years later, she was already here in Virginia, in Richmond, married to her first husband. They had one daughter who died in infancy, and her husband, John, was a sailor, and he actually drowned in 1877 while on duty. So then she married Henry Semler, who you see there on the right, in 1879, also an immigrant from Germany. He arrived in 1863. Together, they had 3 children, Rose, Henry, and Anna. And the 2 damaged images that Mr. Rogers originally offered were of Henry and Anna. Hilda, by the way, just passed away in 1903 here in Richmond. So her family, they lived their entire lives here. Next slide, please. And so this collection really documents her family's history through basically 2.5 generations. So it includes images there on the left on the bottom is Rose and Henry. That was so their first and second children, both born in Virginia. Up on the top left is Rose's christening document that's written in German. It was the christening was in 1882, but the document itself is still in German, although the christening was here in Richmond. The central image is Annie, their youngest child. And then there's this wonderful sort of smaller collection within a collection of the courtship and marriage of Annie to Thomas Baylor. The photograph there is them fishing on their honeymoon. There's a sweet letter she wrote to her future mother-in-law about how she hoped that they would become close and she would be like a daughter. And on top of all this, the benefit one of the benefits of this donation is that any document written in German, the donor also provide a translation of all of them. So I said, yes, this is wonderful. Through the collections committee or the acquisitions committee, these items were accepted as a collection. And when they arrived, there was one additional surprise. Next slide, please. This odd looking little paper covered box. Next slide. And so this little box ended up to be, it's a pressed paper, printed and pressed cardboard. And it actually almost looks like a little book. It's hard to tell because it's fairly broken, but it would open like a book. And then inside the box, next slide, please, were these little notes that were written by the friends of Hilda at that time, Hilda Lang. And so these are from prior to when she came to the United States. The earliest one is from 1855. There are a few from 1855. One of them is on the top left there. It was written by her cousin, August Lang, in 1855, and includes a little hair wreath. They can see that was attached to the card. The one on your right, top right, was written by Gustav in 1858. And the translation sent by the donor translates it to, "Farewell when you are far away. May your merited happiness be like the splendor of stars. Think back upon me often. These lines were written as a remembrance by your friend and future," we don't know what the last word is. Perhaps he was sweet on her, but so it's interesting that these many of these little cards talk about remembering and being far away, but yet they were written in the 1850s, And the family didn't actually immigrate until 1864. So it's occurred to me that perhaps they planned on leaving Germany for many years or several years before they actually left. And perhaps that is one result of the American Civil War going on at the time, as well as, I'm sure, a bunch of other factors, including money and so on. The last card you see there, it's actually more paper than card on the bottom, was actually written in 1864. And it is after the families arrived in the United States. And it was written by Rosalie Mayer in New York. So after leaving Germany, but before arriving in Virginia. The image on the right, by the way, that is Hulda on the right as a teenager, clearly in probably as a teenager looking, you can tell by the dress, especially for a young girl. And, probably just before they left. She was about 17 or 18 years old. So this is probably a couple of years before that. The woman on the left, her name is also Hulda, but with a different last name. So I'm thinking that she might be her aunt or her godmother, but doesn't appear to be her mother. So we're especially excited about this collection coming in because at the time we're working on an exhibit that will feature these items called We the People, the World in Our Commonwealth, which opens on March 21st of 2026. So this exhibit focusing on immigrants to Virginia. These items will be featured as an example of things that immigrants brought with them to Virginia. So we'll be happy to have some of them on exhibit. So that's my story, and I believe we return back to Elizabeth.
We sure do. Thanks, Julie. So we have a little bit of a holiday bonus for you guys today. If probably many of you are familiar with the story of Francine the Lowe's cat. She wandered into the Lowe's on Broad Street in 2017 and was pretty unfriendly by all accounts. But about 18 months in, she decided, we like the good life here. So she has been a sort of Richmond celebrity for several years now. In 2024, there was an election campaign. There were posters all over the city saying, elect Francine for basically anything that she wants. And she actually received 8 votes in the local election, which is pretty incredible. Next slide, please. She, though, is perhaps most famous for wandering off. In September of 2025, people noticed that Francine was missing. And there was video footage. People scoured. They basically discovered that she had gotten on a truck that was bound for a Lowe's distribution center in North Carolina. And there was weeks and weeks of sort of frenzy about getting her back. She made national news. She was featured on Good Morning America because she was actually eventually found. She was at the distribution center and finally wandered into a trap and was returned to Lowe's, where she is just always perched on little boxes and getting pets. So we decided, we really wanted to have a piece of this history and this story. So we purchased this poster of Francine, Richmond's hardest working Lowe's employee. Ryan Myers, who's a local graphic designer, made this poster. It's 11 by 17. All of his posters are. He founded Ryan Myers Prints in 2019 and has basically produced over 350 prints and posters of Virginia, but specifically sort of Richmond images. You can find him at farmers markets, local pop-ups. He has a website where you can purchase all of his prints. But we decided we wanted this one of Francine, both to commemorate her journey, but also because it's just so Richmond specific with her being placed on Monument Avenue. So we just thought it was a great little addition for a kind of unique and singular story. And Richmond loves its cats. I'm a cat lady myself, so I really pushed hard to bring this into the collection. And I guess that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and for all the curators for your great highlights of collection items. We do have a few minutes left on our program today, so please enter your questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next couple of minutes. So to kick us off, we do have a question, and this is for any of the curators to answer, but how does one go about making a donation to the collection?
I can jump in. That's an excellent question, Elizabeth. As Andy said, I think at the beginning, the vast majority of items that come into the collection come to us as gifts. So we're always very eager and interested to hear from people who might be interested in making donations. And as all these presentations, and particularly Julie's, I think, we are always learning and discovering new things. I'm going to try to put a link into the chat of a space on our website. But if anyone's watching later, I think you could probably Google like VMHC donating collections to find this website that has a lot more information about the process for donating. There's a potential donation form on that website where you would put as much information as you have about the items in your possession that you're interested in donating. And then that comes here to the staff. And we spend time researching, looking at images, hopefully that we're able to send, or sometimes if we're able to see things in person. And once we research things, all offers of donation go to an acquisitions committee, which is made up of representatives throughout the staff from the Curatorial Affairs Department, the Collections Management Department, Research and Publications as well. And that group kind of evaluates items for a number of different factors. Primarily of utmost importance is their relevance to the mission of the museum and the stories that we try to tell here. We also look at condition and our sort of resources internally and capacity to care for things, as well as the representation of types of objects, that it doesn't duplicate anything in the collection. And then the committee sort of votes and decides what might be brought into the collection.
Great, thank you so much. All right. And we've got a question here. If someone is interested in learning the provenance, including who the donors were of an item that is now in the collection, how do they go about learning that information?
I can take that one. If with manuscripts and actually with museum objects, provenance is typically from the deed of gift, and it's from correspondence with the donor or the family. So we can, depends on if it's an object, you would go to Corey. If it's manuscripts or library, you would come to me, and we can provide information if the family wants to. Most likely it's listed, and if it's processed, it is listed on the library catalog. If you during research, it has gift of or where the materials came from. But most people are very happy to share that what they've gifted, and we're happy to share the provenance of what comes into the collection.
And just to add on to that, we religiously include that information when we put objects on display. So if you look at the label of any object in the museum, if it was a gift from somebody who wanted to be recognized, we recognize them in the way that they asked, and happy to do that.
Well, thank you for that. All right. Well, in our last few moments, I am going to once again thank our members for attending this program. As we all have echoed, everything we do here is only possible through your support. So thank you so much. And some upcoming events that you may want to mark your calendars for. Of course, as several of the curators said, our exhibitions are open. So we hope you'll come see Unbound. I can attest it's got wonderful artifacts on display. And I know we have even more artifacts related to that in our collection that didn't make it into the exhibition. Also mark your calendars for We the People that will open in March of 2026. We will have a member preview day where members get to see it first and free. So we'll announce that information in the upcoming months. And then this week we have our Member Appreciation Day tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Members get an additional discount in our store and cafe. So instead of 10%, it's 20%. So if you still have folks on your holiday list that you need to grab items for, we've got lots of wonderfully Virginia and locally made objects for sale in our store, and also get a pick-me-up in our Commonwealth Cafe, which now features Stella's. And also for this coming weekend, we will have a holiday maker market in our store. So we'll have local vendors that will be here selling their products, as well as ability to give more information about those locally made items. And then to wrap up the holiday season, we are going to have our annual holiday open house at Virginia House, which is our historic property in Windsor Farms. And that will be on Sunday, December 14th from noon to 4 p.m. You don't have to register for that. It's free. And if you haven't been into Virginia House lately, it'll be decorated for the season. And with that, once again, thank all of our curators for being on the program today, and for Michael for his technical support. And of course, to all of our members, thank you so much for attending this program. And we hope we'll see you again at the museum very soon. Take care.